You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Horror Ramblings Podcast, the show about all things horror. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the place where nightmares become reality. This is the Horror Ramblings Podcast, with me, as always, Lester, and our co-host, the wonderful Stephen White. How you doing today, Stephen?
I'm doing all right. How is everybody?
I think we're all holding in as best as we can. I would like to think. I don't really know how to segue today because my brain is just not functioning very well. Was there any horror news that kind of reached out at you while we were sort of on break here?
I don't know if there was any real big horror news. I know that there was a few things I was trying to keep track of because there were a few new horror releases that were coming up. One surprising thing that I think I shared on one of our pages was Ghoulies, of all movies, is getting a 4K release. And sometimes you wonder how... I know we've not really talked about the franchise as a whole yet. I know that's one of our topics we want to talk about eventually, but how do I say this without without going too deep into it? It's one of those movies you wouldn't expect to get a 4K release over some other movies that have not had a 4K release, such as a franchise that we're actually going to talk about today. How it's not gotten a 4K release is beyond me.
Yeah.
But Ghoulies is getting a 4K release, and I know it's just the first one, but still, it's just like, all right, okay, sure. So somebody took the initiative and went for it. So good on Ghoulies.
You shared that on the Facebook page, and I know this because I had gotten the notification about it, and I clicked it, and I saw Ghoulies, and I saw 4K, and it wasn't anything. I enjoy the Ghoulies films. It's been a long time since I've seen them, so I do need to go back and revisit them. But I just kind of went, huh, because I kind of had the same thought process you did. It was like, really, that's the one they're doing right now? Like, I could see that at some point, but huh.
You're just like, all right, well, if somebody's doing it, why not? I mean, go for it. Everything's moving up to 4K, and I've put a pause on a lot of my DVD, or I shouldn't even say DVD anymore. We don't call them that. Our disc purchases, our physical media, if you will, because there's so much. Because if I'm going to go 4K, I'm going to go 4K all the way. So I'm just going to wait until it becomes available. There were so many that I wanted, like Hellraiser. That's another one that is not on 4K yet.
Yeah.
That should be. Shout Factory, get on it. Or no, Arrow's got that. I think Arrow was the one that released the Blu-rays. Anyway, whoever's got it, get on it.
Get it out there, people.
That's all I'm saying.
I will buy DVDs if I absolutely do not think that the film is ever going to make it to 4K. Because there are some films that I'm like, I doubt that anybody's really paying that much attention. But, like you said, Ghoulies was a surprise, so who knows what's going to happen. And speaking of, like, 80s horror films and everything, my oldest came this past weekend to spend the weekend with us, and wanted to watch a horror movie. Well, little man isn't quite there to watch certain horror films yet.
Sure.
And I was trying to think of something, that we could all watch. And then I remembered that you and I had talked about Critters. Mm-hmm. So we all sat down and we watched Critters the other night. And the kids absolutely loved it. And I just have to point one thing out that is hilarious. My son loves E.T. Mm-hmm. And there is a scene in it where one of the critters is messing with an E.T. plushie.
Yeah.
Well, he leans into it a few times, and Bub, for anybody out there that doesn't know, that's the nickname we give my kid, Bub, because he's got the same name as me, and it gets really confusing. But Bub's watching it, and he's like, oh, he likes E.T. It looks like he's giving him kisses. And then he bites E.T.'s heads off. And in a man voice, I kid you not, in a man voice, he just shouts, why would he do that? We had so much fun with it. There was a little bit of cursing from the critters of all things.
Yeah.
But, my kids, they know the words. It's just the world we live in. They know, kids know curse words. So there was some giggling and, whatnot. But overall, great experience with it.
That's good. In fact, now that you kind of brought those up, that actually reminded me of another franchise that I kind of wanted to shout out. And this is I love the franchise, as small as it is, but it's kind of had a recent revival on Max, and that is Gremlins in Secrets of the Mogwai. Now, if you're looking for... How do I say this? I don't want to shit on it, okay? It seems like it's targeted toward kids because of the animation and kind of the how they posit a lot of the story, but I would almost say that they teeter this line where they're trying to appease children, but also stay true to the elements that made Gremlins so unique. Because even last night, I think there are 4 episodes out right now. By the time you listen to this, it'll probably be 6. But in one of the episodes that I watched last night, there was a scene in there that I was kind of surprised by. And they tamed it down, I can't even speak. They tamed it down in a sense that there wasn't blood gushing everywhere, even though there should have been. And a gremlin bit off a dude's finger and then kept it in his mouth, taunting him. And I was like, good God, is this meant for kids or not? So much in the same vein as Gremlins before it, you kind of wonder, who are we targeting here? Because you're going into some really dark territory, but you're also seeming like you're aiming for kids, so I'm not really sure what you're doing. So I don't want to say tonally it's off, but I feel like it's on point for being kind of dark comedy, but also kind of placating to kids in a way, much like the original did. So it's very interesting. I'll give it that. So I would recommend it, especially if you're into Gremlins, if you enjoyed the only 2 movies, which is just a shame.
Yeah.
If you think about it. Now, granted, they could have ran it into the ground and ruined it, but for my money, 1 and 2 are classic. And I don't give a shit what anyone says about 2, because every time I turn around and I think something is magnifique, there's just this swarm of this army of critics out there who just loathe these things that I thought people liked. And apparently there are a bunch of people out there that hate Gremlins too, and I don't understand it.
I just saw a thing the other day. I can't remember. It was a more recent film that has come out. It was the Mario movie. I know it's not horror, but I just wanted to say this real quick because what you just said, critics shitting on things. I think it was on Rotten Tomatoes. There has never been such a huge difference between critic reviews and audience reviews.
Yeah.
As with that movie. And, let's be honest, there are movies that are just bad. Just movies that no audience really wants to watch. Some people might find some joy out of it while others not so much. But, yeah, Gremlins 2 is probably my favorite. Like, I love the first one, but Gremlins 2 is like, that's my go-to because it's funny. And I don't know, something about the Gremlins, you just want them to be funny in a way. And Little Man, he loves Gremlins too. He loves the singing gremlin. So yeah, the constant shitting on it, I don't understand either. Do you remember? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if you don't like it, either you were expecting something more in the vein of the original, or you're missing the joke entirely. Because I think that's what works in its favor, is it's still a continuation, but they shine a light on the things that, like the plot holes, and practically play satire to the original film. It's like, okay, yeah, we realize this shit's ridiculous, but what about this and what about that? And what if we just said to hell with it and we just do whatever? And how they did it and the commentary they made, I don't know. I thought it was beautifully done.
I always thought that the Gremlins were, to kind of put it into how my mind works on things sometimes. I always looked at the Gremlins like little pieces of Deadpool got mutated and turned into little creatures. Because they break the fourth wall and they're just... It's the same humor. It was like Deadpool before Deadpool.
Yeah.
And a little more appropriate for the kids at the time. Now...
I really hope if they decide to do a third, which I know since this movie has come out, that rumor has come up again, but it has been something I've heard talked about for decades now. But if they do it and Joe Dante is not involved as a director, which, I mean, he may or may not be. I don't know. I just hope that whoever does come on board understands the Gremlins, the concept. Don't try to turn them into dark characters and just whatever. It's supposed to be like the dark humor is supposed to be there.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the characters. It's dark humor, but with this, and even in saying that, this feels like it could be a contradiction or fair comparison. Looney Tunes are very much kind of rooted in dark humor if you think about it.
Yeah.
So they're already kind of doing the same thing. Just lean into that. You can still be vicious. You can still be horror based, but you have to have that dark humor, that really crazy, just outlandish humor that just works.
Yeah. Well, and I think with, especially in the first Gremlins, when you step back and you watch it, you know, the first time you watch it, you just think of them as like these just evil little creatures. But when you actually step back and take a look at the big picture in the film, at least to me, they're just mischievous little creatures.
Mm.
And they know what they're doing is bad, but they don't think what they're doing is that bad.
Right.
And I think that's what makes it, to me as a kid, that's what made it kind of scary, was the fact that, you know, these little creatures are horrible and they're just having a good time with it because they just think it's fun and games. And it's not. So, I don't know. I know a few years ago they did like a Mountain Dew commercial, I think.
Yeah.
That Gremlins Mountain Dew commercial, and Gizmo was still there. They had I can never remember his name because we've talked about it before. He's kind of a jerk. But he was in the commercial, and it was like his kids, and his daughter was like a goth girl, and she had another gremlin that was like he was dark colored, but he hadn't turned into, you know, one of the mean ones yet, but he kind of had an attitude problem like her. I mean, I don't know. I kind of like that. I thought that was cool. You know,
Sure.
It's just, I don't know. I've seen that on it's on Max, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it on there a few times here lately, and I haven't committed to it yet. So
No, it's fine. I mean, it's not a bad show. I'm not saying anything negative about it. I felt like that you do have Joe Dante and even Steven Spielberg kind of in the background as like producers, so they're allowing the main showrunners to kind of do their thing. They seem to understand, but they're also trying to add lore into the mix. Yeah. And I'm almost positive, they haven't said specifically, but I'm almost positive the kid that's our protagonist in this, he is the old man from the movie.
Okay.
Because if you do the math, age-wise, it adds up. So I'm almost positive he's supposed to be the old man as a kid. And then you kind of understand how he and Gizmo got to meet and then whatever adventures they had.
Yeah,
So,
I like that.
yeah. And then that way he kind of understands the importance of a Mogwai and would also kind of inform why he's just like, no, Mogwai is not for sale. He's staying right here. Leave him alone. Like why he's so protective of him. So
see, I like
I
that
think that
because
kind of adds up.
yeah, it adds a depth to that because I mean, it would make you look at that character a little differently after, you know, watch this series, then watch the movie, and maybe you would look at that character in a whole new light. It's kind of
Sure.
like your idea for Pamela Voorhees, telling a story that people might not necessarily know, and it would change the perspective. I like that.
Sure, yeah.
I'm gonna have to give that. Gosh, now I'm gonna have to add it to the list of things to watch. Now,
Well, they're very short little episodes, so I mean, it's probably like 20-minute per episode, so it's not very invasive. So, and I think you'll get a lot of fun out of it. The voice cast is top notch. In fact, the main villain, and I say that with a little bit of, because he's menacing, but he's also kind of got like a dark humor about him as well. And he's voiced by Matthew Rhys, which you might not know the name, but you know his face. And he's just hamming it up in all the best ways. And I think I probably get a lot more joy out of him than I have most of the other characters.
I'm definitely I'm definitely gonna have to check it out now. I wanted to mention too. I know you haven't watched it yet, but for some reason I have to get this opinion out. I watched Evil Dead Rise. I actually really enjoyed it. There is a but here.
Okay.
But I feel like it suffers a little bit from the same problem that a lot of more modern horror films suffer from, in that I feel like the story was rushed just a little bit. They could have given us an extra. They could have given us an extra 20 minutes, maybe even an extra 30 minutes, and pumped a little bit more story into it. I know it. I know at this point, Evil Dead, it is an established franchise. We know these characters. We know how this stuff works. But I wanted to know a little bit more about the actual characters in this film. It's also a little misleading. This won't spoil anything for you, but I'm going to just put this out there. When I heard they were going to an apartment building, I thought we were going to have a ton of deadites. I thought it was going to be a building full of people.
Right.
It's not. It's a building that is being condemned and about to be torn down. There's like one floor of people.
Gotcha.
So that kind of like threw me for a loop. I was hoping for, and I get it, maybe that was a lot for them to wrap their heads around doing at the time, and that's completely fine. The only other issue that I had for this being an Evil Dead movie, yes, it had gore, and they didn't have quite as much gore as they had in the remake that they did a while back. It did have gore, but it's the same issue that I run into. It was too clean. I wanted a little bit of that grittiness on the camera.
Yeah.
And that kind of pulled me away. I get, 4K and high def, that's the new thing. But sometimes you have to incorporate that like grittiness into the film. Other than that, like a few aesthetic things and the ending kind of throwing me off just a little bit because it was something new that they've never done before. And this is a different book. So this book has different things that it does to people, different effects that it has. The ending, I when I first watched it, I was like, that was okay. It was different. I appreciate it more now that I've like sat on it a little bit. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. I don't want to act like I'm shitting on it because I'm not. But I do feel like horror films now are kind of pushing through and rushing. And I think it has to do a lot with audiences because a lot of newer audiences are people who like watch TikToks all day and everything else. They want instant gratification. They want to get through and to the point as quick as possible. And I think that films are adjusting for that. And that's where I think we're getting these issues. It's the same problem that people had with, I'll mention it again, it's not horror, but the Mario movie. It felt rushed a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where I think they were like, oh, well, everybody knows who these characters are already. Everybody just wants to get to the point. We don't want to build up a story. Well, sometimes that affects things. They built a pretty good story in Evil Dead Rise, and you do feel a closeness with the characters, but I wish they would have built on it just a little bit more, just a tiny bit more. If they would have added that one extra scene or one extra thing, I think it would have been an even better film because it was a great film, but I feel like there was a little bit that they could have done. And they made a reference to Nightmare on Elm Street, which was cool. I feel like that was like an inside joke because they made references in the other movies, so to Wes Craven at least, and I loved the reference. It was funny. There is legitimately a scene where somebody chokes on another person's eyeball because one of the deadites spits an eyeball out that they just ripped out of somebody's face into another person's throat across the room, and they choke on it. So it had some cool things that happened in it. And overall, I enjoyed it, and I hope they end up doing what they've talked about doing, bringing the 3 books together.
Yeah.
And maybe when they do that, maybe it will be like an army of deadites. And I could see the 2 girls in the beginning coming together, or like midway through the film coming together, and then maybe not exactly in the final act, but close to the final act, old Brucey boy comes back, because that would be badass. And just the 3 of them taking their chainsaws and digging them into, I
think it would be cool.
Yeah, but Evil Dead Rise was good. I enjoyed it.
And I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but I want to anybody who may be talking about kind of what you said, where things feel rushed here lately with Mario, with that. I saw just the other night Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and this is a movie that clocked in at 2 hours 20 minutes. Now, you'd think sometimes when movies go long, because I've heard this argument that, oh my God, you're gonna waste my time for over 2 hours. And sometimes when movies do go long, they have all these extra things and side missions and quests and things, and you're just like, why is this even in the movie? Cut that shit out and move on. And then we get movies like Mario, where it just feels like it's missing something. Like there's some things that you could have fleshed out and added to, and it would just hit a sweet spot, you know? For a movie that clocked in at 2 hours and 20 minutes, not a moment was wasted.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you that on point. Not a moment in that film felt wasted. And this is not a spoiler, but if you're afraid that it might be, you can skip ahead 5 seconds or whatever. That's only half the story. Think about that. You didn't waste any moment in 2 hours, 20 minutes, and that was only half your story? Holy shit.
Wow.
So it can be done.
Yeah.
You don't have to rush everything. And if you feel like you're targeting, again, going back to Mario, you think that's, well, if kids aren't going to be paying, who do you think is watching Spider-Man? You know, kids are watching that too. So 2 hours, 20 minutes versus 90, and you're telling me that there were plenty of kids in there, and they seemed to be enjoying it. My daughter was not one of them because she was wallowing the seats, but that's just her thing. She was engaged from time to time. You know, you'd kind of see her watching, and then she'd be like, because, you know, boring adult stuff. But again, not a moment wasted. So filmmakers need to find the sweet spot.
Yeah.
You don't have to cut out everything. Sometimes I know you're trying to make it lean and mean and just get to the point, but I kind of like you. I kind of want a little substance sometimes, you know, especially if the characters are engaging enough. I want to know a little bit more about it. Help me understand where they're coming from and let me connect with them on some level, and I'll have more to kind of feed back on, you know, and I'm like, oh man, now I'm emotionally invested.
And see, that was my issue. That was my big issue with Evil Dead Rise. I felt like as soon as I started to get attached to these characters a little bit, they were already gone.
Yeah.
And that drove me crazy. Like they started to build that attachment really early on in the film. They did, and they did a wonderful job. But even the hero of the film, I felt like we could have had a little bit more about the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this won't be a spoiler either, but I will put it out there. The woman that we see in the trailers for Evil Dead Rise, the one who is like the main Deadite.
Mm-hmm.
The person that she goes up against, the person that is the hero of the film, is her sister. That is a whole emotional roller coaster right there that I wish they would have played on just a little bit more.
Sure.
Just a little bit more. And that pulled me away from getting super involved with the film. But overall, like I said, I did enjoy it. But a little more substance goes a long way. And like you said, if they can find that sweet spot, things are perfect. But, you know, studios have a way of making sure things get cut. The franchise we're going to talk about today is one of those franchises that's actually what kind of led to the death of it.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else before we hop into this one? Because people are going to have to get their shots ready.
No, and play responsibly today. Because you practically be drinking the entire episode.
You might die of alcohol poisoning. Now, I looked this up a few years ago. I just looked it up again today because I'm a little hazy on some of the information, because it's been a minute since I've looked up information to talk about it with someone. This is the third biggest horror franchise of all time. Adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
In 2023, it is worth $793.5 million. We have had multiple films. The actor who played the villain, everybody hates to love and loves to hate. He has become an icon in his own right and is having a film released about his life.
Mm-hmm.
We are obviously talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. My favorite film franchise of all time. My favorite horror villain. I don't even know how to begin this. I want to talk about Wes Craven real quick. May he rest in peace. I wish Wes was still around. It would be interesting to see what he would do, because I feel like he would have done something with Nightmare on Elm Street again. I really do feel when the rights reverted back to him, because he got cheated when they did the remake. He really did. But he's an Ohio guy. He was born in
Makes sense.
Cleveland, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Very religious family. He was not allowed to go to the movies. The only movies that he was really ever allowed to watch were Disney movies. And when he was in school, they had a film. They had like a film thing that they would do. Like, they would put movies on, I think, after lunch or something. It's in there's a biography about him that is wonderful. and if you get a chance to listen to it, I listened to it on audiobook. So, but that's how he got in touch with a lot of the film stuff. And he went to church. He was very devout in the church. He fell away from the church, and he started making films that sort of played on religious stories and the absence of God, the absence of purity, things like that. And let's be real, he did a lot of amazing films. One of his first major horror films that he did was Last House on the Left, which at the time that came out, it was one of the most controversial films at that time. They really thought he was just an evil human being. People were running up and down the aisles screaming. People were protesting. Everything you can think of. He gave us The Hills Have Eyes, countless other films. I'm not going to get into all of it because then we could just talk about Wes Craven all day. But then...
Topic for another day.
But then he gave us Nightmare on Elm Street. And let's be real. There's 7 films, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
We have,
8 if you count the remake.
Which at the moment I'm not going to count the remake. But it all started with Nightmare on Elm Street 1, which is just titled Nightmare on Elm Street, so not to go too nuts here. Just looking up my information here because I want to make sure that I'm doing this justice. 1984 was the first release. At the time, Wes Craven was going to go a very different direction with Freddy. He was going to go full-fledged child molester in the film.
Mm-hmm.
He decided not to do that. There was a big thing going on at the time. There was a huge scandal about child molestation going on, and he thought that they should change that concept of the script. And they hinted at it, obviously. If you watch any of the films, it's hinted at. Very hardcore. It's never said, but it's hinted at. But he understood that the loss of innocence is one of the most frightening things in the world. And what is one of the most innocent things in the world? Children. He went a step further by making this monster come after the children in the one spot where they couldn't be protected, in their dreams. Freddy is only in the first film 7 minutes, something like that. But the impact that film had was enough to help create New Line cinema. If people never understood that, that is why they say New Line is the house that Freddy built. But, I mean, I just gush over things. I'm not always super factual when I'm gushing over films. The first Nightmare on Elm Street was not the first one that I had seen. I had seen the third one first, which we will talk about. But down the road, I watched the new one. I fell in love with Nancy Thompson and with Tina.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Lieutenant Thompson was a badass, and John Saxon was a badass in real life too.
Sure.
But the villain, I'll go on about Robert Englund. But what are your thoughts on the first film? Do you remember when you first got to see the first film, and what were your thoughts on it?
My first encounter with it was not a good experience because I knew, like, Freddy was a pop star about this time when I was starting to get interested. You know, I had friends who were big into Freddy, and suddenly you started seeing his face everywhere. I remember T-shirts. Like, I wanted to be a Fred head, you know. I remember wanting a shirt, and I'm almost positive I got it, which had Freddy on it, because it was just like, yeah, this is badass, this is cool, look at Freddy, because he's awesome. And I was in it, you know, and I wanted to be in this group. But I realized I didn't know anything about the movies. I hadn't really watched any, but I wanted to, so I was going to try and see if I could get there. Now, I have there's a blurred line somewhere where I'm almost positive I had to know part 1 had to be the one that I attempted to watch first. Mm-hmm. Because it's almost like these years kind of blur together. But I attempted to rent and watch part 1, and I stopped during Tina's death because it was so intense for a child that I couldn't take it, and I got sick, and I was just like, nope. It was too much for my brain to handle. So I stepped away from it. But I remember seeing snippets of it. Like, I remember being at a cousin's house one time, and then they were watching it, and I saw Johnny Depp get sucked into the bed and it explode all over the ceiling. But for some reason, that didn't affect me. Now, maybe I was prepared for it, maybe. Yeah. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of messed up. But it didn't just have that visceral effect like Tina, because Tina's intense. Like, that whole death sequence I mean, it brings it. There's an energy to it that's just so intense and just, I don't know, primal on how she's being thrashed around and just torn apart, and her reactions are just so genuine that, I don't know, it really gets to you. And I think that's what did that for me as a child. But again, the depth sequence is just all special effects, so it didn't quite hit the same way, maybe, and maybe that's why it didn't bother me.
I think it's what you don't see. You know,
Yeah.
it's not as bad. You're still sitting there going, holy moly,
Yeah.
by what happened. Real quick before you continue, I just have to say, do you know how they did that effect?
I'm almost positive it was kind of a upside down, backwards row, something like that.
So the same room that Tina dies in, they had built a room in a box that they could turn. So in that scene at the beginning when Tina's dying, she is actually on the floor, and her man who's laying in bed is on the ceiling. They had everything tacked down. They had him attached to the bed and everything else. Well, they could turn this room. Well, in the scene where Johnny Depp gets sucked into the bed, they pull him through, and then they start to rotate it. And as they're rotating it, there are these guys standing above this built room with the way they described it, with like a bathtub full of blood. And they say, go, and they start pouring it. And it's interesting because when you watch the movie, during that scene, you actually see the blood kind of start to go to one side of the room. But that, I mean, now they use CGI for all that. But just the creativity in that is just mind-blowing to me. But sorry to interrupt you, but I had to say that real quick. But please continue.
No, it's a fascinating scene, and I've loved watching a lot of the behind the scenes stuff about how they do those effects, especially after so many years. You kind of get curious, and it's like, I wonder how they did that. So yeah, those are fascinating stories. But somewhere in this line, I didn't quite see 2 yet. But again, those same cousins that were watching the original, and I saw that, I remember they had watched, I think part 2 had recently come out. You know, like part 3 had yet to really hit just yet, but I remember seeing snippets of that. Like, I didn't quite understand what was going on. I remember the scene where he comes out during the picnic or the cookout and whatnot. So I remember snippets of that, but I couldn't tell you shit about the movie. I had no idea what the movie was about. I just remember snippets. But 3 was the one that I'm almost positive I watched from beginning to end, even though I did have a moment. Because the one scene in that movie that got me as a kid and still kind of makes me uncomfortable, but I've gotten used to it over the years, I guess, is the puppet kid, where
his tendons,
they just rip out his veins and shit like that. It's like, oh my God, it just made me squirm so bad then, and it still kind of does now, but like I said, I've gotten used to it to where I'm just like, But that one almost messed me up, because I was like, I don't know if I can deal with that, because it was just so, I'd never seen anything like it, and it was just, I got a thing about veins and shit. So that was a step too far.
You know, that's one thing about the original films that I really appreciate. You know, you look at the first film, the way Freddy kills is creative. It always has been. The first film, it was mainly with the glove, you know. But if you think about the entire plot in the first film, Freddy kills Tina, but you think that her boyfriend killed her. They arrest him. Freddy kills him in jail and makes it look like he hung himself. So you already have it where it looks like one kid murdered another and then hung themselves because of the guilt. Mm-hmm. And then we get to Johnny Depp's death, which just makes everybody go, what the hell? And then obviously everything happens with Nancy and everything. That, to me, that's creative. You know, it adds this level to me of eeriness to it. It's like, this monster is killing these kids and making it all look like, you know, murder and crazy accidents. That way nobody believes Nancy. And I think that's why that still sticks with me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why part 2 kind of falls off the radar for people. Part 2 is a great film. The problem with part 2, at least in my mind, when you're watching some of the first parts in part 2, it's not Robert Englund as Freddy. Mm-hmm. There was a conflict of his pay for it and everything else. They thought they could do it without him. They filmed some without him. It just wasn't any good.
And it's so apparent,
yes.
too.
And so they, you know, they had him come back. And I don't care what anybody says about part 2. Part 2 does get shit on. At the time when it come out, you know, being gay in Hollywood was not a super well accepted thing. And they've done a documentary about it. Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, you know, the Mark Patton documentary, who is a lovely man, by the way, who played Jesse, for anyone who doesn't know. They say that Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is the gayest horror film that was ever made. A lot of innuendos. But I'm going to tell you what else Part 2 gave us. Part 2 also gave us one of the best-looking Freddys and one of the scariest iterations of Freddy. And if people don't believe that, just watch the cookout scene, because that Freddy is next level Freddy. And, you know, there's been a handful of times where Robert Englund has not been Freddy in the franchise. One of the most famous scenes, it's not him. The scene where the glove reaches up in the bathtub in Part 1, not Robert Englund. Super Freddy, not Robert Englund. There's countless other scenes. We'll get into those, obviously, but it's extremely apparent in Part 2, and I feel like that is part of what makes it a miss for some people. I get there's, you know, the innuendos and the other things that sort of fall under the radar for people with it, but I mean, that never bothered me. I think the biggest thing about Part 2 that bothered me was they made Freddy like every other slasher.
Sure.
They brought him into the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be completely honest, the first time I watched Part 2, I kind of was like, didn't hate it, but I didn't love it.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, as I've watched it more, I've just come to appreciate it so much more with every watching.
Yeah.
You know, I got lucky, and it sounds like you got lucky too. Part 3 was the film that we both got to experience.
Sure.
And the thing about that film that's so wonderful is Freddy's still extremely scary in it. He does start to get his one-liners. He does start to get, you know, a little goofy. I don't want to say real goofy, but he does start to get a little more funny with certain things that he says. But it's a really dark humor.
Yeah.
And the kills, the creative kills in that film. You know, we meet the Dream Warriors. We, you know, the scene where her arms open up and Freddy has the needles, you know, want to get high. And to this day, I picture those little mouths on her arms opening, and, you know, the Wizard Master, you know, with the killer wheelchair. I mean, come on. It should be campy. It should be. It should be goofy to people. But it's the dream world. Mm-hmm. Freddy can do anything. And I think Part 3 really just, it puts that in a perfect way where it seems ridiculous when you think about it, but it works because of the way that Freddy just adores the violence that he creates. You know, the scene with the TV will always be one of my favorite scenes.
Right.
You read that on paper, you'd probably be like, what? And then you see what they did with it. It's brilliant. And another fun fact, that line, which is one of the most famous lines in Nightmare on Elm Street, "Welcome to Prime Time, bitch." Robert Englund did that himself, because it wasn't going to be "Welcome to Prime Time, bitch." It was going to be something completely different, and that's what sounded right. So that's what he went with. And today, you know, people say that all the time. And I love to, just with Part 3, I'm not going to try to gush over Part 3 too much, but I love in Part 3 how even the villain has growth. And what I mean by that, we have the first film. Freddy feeds off of their fear. That's how he has his power. Part 2, he's trying to take over Jesse. He's trying to cause Jesse fear. He's trying to get Jesse to kill for him. That tactic doesn't work. We get into Part 3. Freddy's still using fear. That's the biggest thing that Freddy uses, fear. But he begins to take the souls of the children of Elm Street. He takes the souls of his victims to give him more power. I mean, I love how the character continues to change and advance, and that's what I love about him as a villain. Obviously, that sort of becomes the gimmick after Part 3, that he, you know, steals the souls of the children that he kills, but they always find a creative way to make that work.
Right.
You know, and I was like 6 years old when I watched Part 3. And the only reason that I stopped on Part 3, I was fast-forwarding a VHS tape. I know I've told this story before, but I stopped when I saw the house being built out of the popsicle sticks. Mm-hmm. And it's like, come on, you know?
Yeah.
But, no, yeah, I don't know. Part 3 holds a special place for me, but I will say this, and I cannot believe I'm saying this. It used to be the film that I thought was the top Nightmare on Elm Street film, but I don't think that anymore.
Really?
Yeah. It's actually a little bit further down the list. Now, sorry, I'm looking something up real quick. What, let's see, we're on part 4 here. What did you think of part 4?
Well, I did kind of want to...
Oh, did you have I'm sorry, did you have something else?
I didn't...
Yeah, I'm
quite
sorry.
have anything. I mean, with part 2, I didn't really... The very first time I think I actually sat and watched it is I found... if younger listeners may not know what VHS is, but there was a time when we used to have these cassette tapes called VHS or Beta, if that was your kind of thing. And there was I think I found it at a Kmart. It was like a 2-pack of Nightmare 1 and 2, but they were recorded on the poorest fucking quality. You know, it was just... Another thing to remember about VHS, you had recording speed. You had SP, LP, and EP. These were recorded on EP. So they were very, very poorly recorded. But it was a cheap set, so I got 2 movies for like, I think it was either 10 or 20 bucks. Either way, it was a deal. And I was like, fuck it, why not? So that I had both of these movies in my possession for a long time. And that's where I actually started to watch part 2 and really try to learn to appreciate or see it for the first time, and then my experiences. Because, yeah, my first viewing experience, I'm going to admit, I was a kid of the 90s who, you know, queerness was not prominent. It wasn't a thing. And you're always taught, especially where I came from, it's bad because Bible Belt. So it was confusing when you had a lot of this homosexual innuendo just kind of in your face, and it made me feel uncomfortable, and I hate that it did. But again, think about what I was being taught, and I did not quite understand what was going on. So you'd see these things, and it felt wrong. And luckily, it wasn't just like, fuck this movie, I'm not watching this garbage again. I still liked the movie. I just had to get over these problems that I had. And I did. And I appreciated it a hell of a lot more. Like you said, the more you watch it, you come to appreciate what it's trying to do, the message. I just hate that everything that did happen behind the scenes, after the fact, to Mark Patton and so on, it's a damn shame.
Yeah.
Because if that movie were made today, it would be embraced.
Oh.
It would be beloved.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it would have skyrocketed to such heights, I think.
And that's what kills me about it too. Mark Patton is, like I said, he's a extremely nice guy, but he's a really good actor too.
Yeah.
Like he's fantastic, and he's the one character that I wish would have gotten redemption. Like I know he wrote, I know Mark Patton wrote Jesse's journals, and it's a whole book about what happens to Jesse after the events of the film and everything else. But I would have loved to have seen him in another movie. You know, I mean, you know that extremely well. Not going to get into this topic because this could be a whole other thing. You know, I've written him into an idea that I had because I feel like he should have that redemption.
Yeah.
He's a great character. You know,
He is.
Nancy was a great character. And it's weird about Nancy, just to kind of teeter here real quick. Spoilers for anybody who's not seen Nightmare on Elm Street, which if you haven't, what the hell are you doing with your life? You know, Nancy gets killed in part 3. But to just show the impact that she has on people, she's one of the only final girls that I know that is still so popular, even though she died.
Yeah.
People still consider her a final girl, even though she died.
I mean, she was.
Yeah, I mean, she survived the first film, and you really thought she was going to survive the second. And I know one of the biggest issues that a lot of people have with Nightmare on Elm Street is the fact that she got killed. And I don't know, I feel like that had to happen, in a sense. Because having Nancy come back and fight him in every film would kind of turn into a Scream situation.
Sure.
And eventually people would be like, I don't know about all this. So.
Yeah. But now with 3, that's the one I remember. That's the one that I think, that's when Freddy's popularity really started to skyrocket. That's when he became the MTV, you'd start seeing him here. He was starting to become a rock star. And I think that's why I was kind of jumping on board. I was like, yeah, I want to be a part of this because hell yeah, Freddie, And kind of like what you said, just something about the entire movie as a whole, it felt a little bit bigger. It felt a little bit more fantastic. It didn't quite just feel like a horror movie. It felt like something more because they were really expanding on the concept of what dreaming is. Like you said, with it maybe seeming corny at times, why not?
Yeah.
Your dreams can come up with anything. Why not take it to the limit? If you want to think of this, think of this. If you want to become that, think of that. Just balls to the wall, go for it.
Yeah.
Because you're in a dream world. Do whatever. So when Freddy does something that people are like, well, that's a little corny. It's a dream world.
Yeah.
He can do anything.
And,
I
can't remember who I was having a conversation with. It might have been Chad, and it might have been just the time that we were hanging out. But we had got to talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, and the best way that I could think of to describe why I think it has withstood the test of time is the fact that if you think about it, it's almost like a Saturday morning cartoon that's been turned real. Like it's in the same realm of like He-Man, Master of the Universe, in a way, And when you say that, part 3 really gets into this like epic, huge thing, that's what I think of, like this just huge fantasy epic from the 80s. Like that's what I think of, and I feel like that is what has helped it withstand the test of time. And Freddy would not be who he is. Freddy would not be as famous as he is, would not be a part of pop culture the way that he is if it wasn't for Robert Englund.
Sure.
And I will die on that hill.
No, that's an absolute fact. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that because I know that there have been, if you dig into some trivia, I think one name that was very prominent as who could have been Freddy was David Warner, who is a fantastic actor in his own right. But I cannot imagine him being Freddy and say he did do the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Say that he was the choice that they took and they went down that road. Freddy would have been a completely different character because I don't think he would have committed, and I could be wrong, but I don't feel like he would have committed to it the same way Robert Englund did.
Yeah.
And really create the persona that Robert Englund did because, as we said, he became a rock star in some ways because of the MTV stuff where he was popping up on just everywhere. Everywhere.
He even went on, he was on like Japanese talk shows. He did late nights. Mm-hmm. He was even on Nickelodeon at one point, freaking the kids out. He was on Mad TV. Now,
and
go ahead.
Well, that alone right there, the fact that he was on Nickelodeon, they knew, yes, he is a horror, icon, but kids love him. So they're kind of scared of him, but not so much so that we can't just use him on, something like Nickelodeon. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
But that's who he was.
Now,
and
I had to say this real quick while it's on my mind. I've heard mixed arguments on, what did you say, David Warner? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard mixed arguments on the validity of the statement that he was in line for Freddy. I've heard that it's a rumor. I've heard that it's true. I've seen like test footage and things like that. But the one person that I wanted to bring up real quick, who just talked about it in an interview a few years back, which would have given us an extremely different Freddy, was Kane Hodder. I don't know if you had ever heard that.
I had not.
He got a script about Freddy when Freddy was still a child molester, when they were still going off of that. And he was like, nope, not going to do that. And I'm really thankful that didn't happen because I love Kane Hodder, but I could not picture him as Freddy either.
Yeah.
Like, that would just throw me off. But I have heard the David Warner thing, and the only reason that I said something about hearing it as a rumor is there's a documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street that some fans did that we've talked about, and I had seen a post from one of them the other day about that, and they were saying that they had interviewed someone involved with Nightmare on Elm Street and that they said that that wasn't true. But then they had other people that were saying it was true. So it's like, is it or isn't it?
Yeah, because I thought, I'm almost positive I saw like a makeup test or something like that. And granted, you can't really tell because it's makeup, but it's supposed to be David Warner in test makeup for Freddy. That's just what I've heard. I've seen that same documentary. I understand what you mean. So, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be true.
Yeah, and I've seen that as well, and I'm like, is it? Isn't it? I'm like, it really makes me. It frustrates you because it's like, is this real? Is it not? But
why didn't they go to the man himself? I mean, Christ's sake, he didn't. Just recently passed. I mean, damn. It's
like, like you were saying though, seeing someone else as Freddy, it would make sense because we've gotten so used to it. And I think that's the reason why they're struggling to come up with something new.
Yeah.
Because Robert Englund he made Freddy what Freddy is. Mm. And I know this documentary coming out about Robert Englund, they talked to him about being a horror icon, and I guess I know I'm not going to say this word for word like he did, but he basically said that he's not an icon as Robert Englund. He said, Freddy's an icon. I'm not an icon. I'm just a guy that got lucky enough to play this character and have this character be a big part of my life. But I don't believe that. I see him as iconic because, yes, he's known mainly for Freddy, but he's also played countless other characters in movies some movies that are great, some movies that are not so great. But if there's one thing that is consistently good in every movie that he's in, it's him.
You know, I'll even piggyback off of that to reinforce that statement and say he's absolutely wrong in that. Jason Voorhees is iconic, not because of an actor, but because of a mask. Michael Myers, same deal. Not because of an actor, a mask. A presence, if you will. Robert Englund is Freddy.
Yeah.
We've had only one other actor take that role on, and they're not well beloved. So to say that it's not Freddy that's iconic without him, absolute horseshit. That version is what people know. Yeah. If there had been multiple movies without him and Freddy had gone on and there was just so many other actors who'd done the role, sure. But it's him. Same with like Brad Dourif in The Voice. There's only been one other person that's done Chucky, and they're not remembered. Love Mark Hamill, but not remembered.
Yeah.
You cannot have Chucky without Brad Dourif. You cannot have Robert Englund or Freddy without Robert Englund. They're synonymous.
Yeah.
So until somebody can take that away and become Freddy and own that role in the same way that he did, no, they are intertwined like that. They are equally iconic, period.
And, to even add further to this conversation, in regards to him being an icon, meeting him is enough to see him as an icon, because I've never met anyone from film or television, from any of those realms, that is as humble and just all around nice to people. Robert Englund is probably one of the nicest people you will ever meet. I know him from V as well.
Mm-hmm.
I know him he was in a movie called Zombie Strippers. The movie's horse shit, but his performance, amazing. 2001 Maniacs, another film I really love. He was in a movie a while back called The Last Showing. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Sounds familiar, but I don't think I've seen it.
He is he works at a theater. He controls the projector, and they're basically forcing him to retire because they're getting like a digital projector, and they don't need an old man to run the projector anymore, make sure the film's in there and everything else. And he goes on this journey to make his own movie, and it's a horror film. It's more of like a thriller, but it really shows his acting chops, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I loved him in Stranger Things. He wasn't in it that long, but I loved him in Stranger Things, which he actually had auditioned for before, and he didn't get the part that he auditioned for. A lot of people don't know that. He was going to be the mayor.
Oh,
and
cool.
he thought that they wanted a mayor kind of like the mayor from Jaws, just a complete ass.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he went in and did it, and it wasn't quite what they were looking for. But, I get him saying that Freddy's iconic and he's not iconic, But I feel like it's one of those things where Robert Englund is iconic because of Freddy, and Freddy is iconic because of Robert. Like you said, it's synonymous.
Yeah.
They're iconic because of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's why, and we've had this conversation, that's why I feel like the films should have gone in another direction. They should have done another film. It should have gone in a certain direction. When we get to the end of this show, I'll probably bring that up because I don't want to bring it up while we're talking about while we're in the middle of talking about the movies. But yeah, no, I'm glad you look at it the same way that I do. Like, don't say you're not. It's okay to be humble, but damn it, you are iconic, Robert Englund. If you're out there and you come across this show, you are an icon. People love you, man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's see. We were talking about 3, correct?
Yeah, but I think we're practically up 4. I don't really know what more we can. I mean, we could go on. I mean, all right. I'll give a little shout out because let's talk about the people who wrote 3.
Okay.
Because you talk about that. That's kind of an interesting take because Wes Craven came back to help pen that script, which I think adds to why it's so interesting. But then you also have people like Frank Darabont, who contributed to it. And then, of all people, if you take a look at the director, was Chuck Russell, who might be best known for The Mask, which is also a New Line picture. Interesting hodgepodge of people who are kind of responsible for this movie, but it works, you know?
You know, you think about it though. The Mask and Freddy would probably get along.
Oh yeah, 100%. Especially if they went with the, and this is just a nitpick of mine, the comic version of The Mask is so much more. What's the word I'm looking for here? An agent of chaos, if you will.
He's a lot more sinister.
Yes. So yeah, they would absolutely 100% get along.
You know, it's funny because the studio asked for Wes Craven to come back and help with the script. And Wes Craven never wanted to do a sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street. He had a version of Freddy in his mind that was a lot worse than what we got. He was a lot more foul-mouthed, a lot more inappropriate, much darker. Like, Wes Craven really wanted people to hate this character. And of course, you know, I guess this is one spot where I might give the studios a little credit. They were like, we don't want to make him like that terrible. He's already pretty bad. But, you know, to me, the 3 Nightmare on Elm Street films that are held in the highest regard, Wes Craven has his hand in. And 3 is definitely, like I said, 3 seems to be the one that a lot of people go for. And they're like, this is the best one that was ever done.
And you know, I do want to kind of comment on that real quick. Yeah. Because I think it's almost because it feels like a tonal shift. Because anytime I do like a marathon, anytime I'm just like in the mood and you start watching it, 1 has a feel, 2, like I said, as we said, kind of has a similar feel, but it's different in its own way. So these 2, the first 2 films have a unique vision to them. They kind of stand apart. And then when you get to 3, it's almost like this is the starting point for everything going forward. Yeah. And there's just a feel about it. Something doesn't feel quite horror. It doesn't feel quite as dingy. You know what I'm saying? There's just something about it. Just feels like a step up. And I think that's what kind of clicks, because every time I get there, it's just like, all right, now we're getting into it. And then from here, you know, we're on it. Because if you think about it, from 3 to 5, that's a trilogy. Yeah. That it really holds to itself. It's a trilogy of its own.
Well, before we get any further, guys, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to actually cut this into 2 parts because obviously listening to a whole podcast for 2 hours, it's quite a bit, guys, but we have a lot of love for Nightmare on Elm Street. So Steven's going to let you guys know where to find us, and we will post part 1 this Friday coming up. Well, we will have already posted it because you're listening to it. And then next Friday, guys, we will have part 2 up. So, Steven, if you want to let the people know where to find us, go ahead.
Well, Ramblers, however you feel about Nightmare on Elm Street, let us know on Twitter at Horror Ramblings. If you've got more to say and a tweet's just not going to do, send us an email at horrorramblings@gmail.com. If you want to discuss horror with like-minded individuals, join our Facebook group or join us in our Ramblers room on Discord. You can even find us on Instagram to see an assortment of horror images. And if you're feeling generous and you want to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/pencil-and-paper-productions. If you want to help the show grow, leave us a beautiful 5-star review on your favorite podcasting app. and tell your friends to find us on their favorite platform as well. If you happen to be using Spotify, take a look at our weekly questions and polls when we post them. Let us know what you think over there. And finally, if you prefer a central hub, keep up with any and all things at pencilpaperproductions.com/horror-ramblings. Links are in the show notes for your convenience.
And remember, guys,
You are all his children now. This has been the Horror Ramblings podcast. Join us next time for even more.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.